Hi, my name is Joanne Garrigus Corbally. I have lived most of my life in Benicia. I went through Benicia schools and had my first job at Benicia Arsenal, another job at Mare Island Navy Yard, but the important job of my life, and in addition to being a wife and mother, was 25 years as a real estate agent and broker. So, I'm an old-time Benician.
I was 11 years old in May 1946 when my parents found Benicia and moved us all here. My 3 younger brothers, our little snippy terrier Jigger, and me. We had migrated to California 4 years earlier and lived for those 4 years in a rented house in the Mission District, San Francisco, 910 Shotwell Street. I think it was my mother's passion to own her home that caused them to spend almost every Sunday for a year on family drives around the Bay Area. Dad had been living in San Francisco for a year before Mom put us kids in the old car we had and followed him, and I know one of the lures he dangled to get her to leave Minnesota was the promise they could buy a home when she got here. We looked at a lot of homes in the city, but apparently nothing we could buy on his shipyard salary, and I know she never forgave him for that lapse. She loved living there, a far cry from the dairy farm she was raised on, but she had to own her home. Our new home at 45 Hillcrest Avenue was a new home. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, deep sink and laundry space in the attached garage, about 800 square feet in the living area, and there was a crawl space high enough to walk upright under 1/2. I remember hearing them say it cost $4,000. I was the only person who got a private bedroom. My 3 brothers had to share. One of the earliest events I remember was very sad. Dad, who I now know had a strong entrepreneurial streak, had started a business in San Francisco, raising and butchering rabbits and selling their pelts. He brought his herd of about 15 and hutches to Benicia and temporarily installed them under the house. The month was May, and there was a heat wave lasting a day or two, just long enough for all of the rabbits to die from it. Dad was away at work, and Mom had us kids running to a nearby chicken farm to see if we could find out what to do. We were told to water them down with the hose, but it was too late. Dad's business was gone. The main thing I remember from our earliest days in Benicia was freedom. When school was out, my brothers and I could ride our bikes and walk anywhere, and nobody worried about us. Behind the houses across Hillcrest from us, where now is Semple School, in those days was a chicken farm surrounded by fields full of anise weed. The boys had forts there. I was occasionally allowed in for a very short visit, but just long enough to satisfy my curiosity about their activities. I don't remember ever getting permission for our forays into the larger world, but I do remember packing lunches when we knew it would be a long day, so parents probably knew what was going on. Our adventures took us downtown, biking, where on one occasion we climbed into the 2-story tannery building on the east side of First Street. It had burned before we came to town and been left locked up and apparently abandoned ever since. It was a lot of fun, plenty of sunlight coming through all the holes in the roof and floors, but was a very dangerous place, and we knew it and didn't stay long. We were lucky not to fall through the floors. That building caught fire again later on and pretty much burned down. Downtown held other fascinations for us. 2 movie theaters where we spent our Saturday afternoons, City Park, and it was right on Carquinez Strait. We loved to explore the waterfront. Many of the old buildings, hotels and stores, and even some homes, had docks behind them, and we'd go on them to get a good look at the water, watching for fish. And for just a dime, we could get on the ferry to go to the bike shop in Martinez. Later, as a teenager, I spent a day now and then playing hooky from school with a friend, riding the ferry back and forth. As long as we didn't get off in Martinez, 1 dime apiece lasted the whole day. We sometimes headed the other direction, to Lake Herman Road, either hiking or biking. One time, the boys and friends and a couple dogs went out there, and that late afternoon a rancher, Brido, parked his pickup loaded with 2 dead sheep in front of our house and accused my brothers and their friends of sicking the dogs on his sheep and running the sheep to death. The boys indignantly swore it never happened, but it took them and my mother several hours at the police station with the rancher before they were let go with a warning to keep themselves and their dogs away from ranch property. We had a lot of fun in our own neighborhood, too. We never had any trouble getting together a gang to play ball or kick the can in the street. One of my own favorite activities was loafing on our front porch reading novels. My brother Rod got a paper route in 1947 or 48. I don't know whether it was the Vallejo or San Francisco paper, but it was a morning paper. He had to get up early to roll the papers and stuff his bag. I often helped him and enjoyed going with him on the route. His route covered all of the Highlands where we lived and across East 5th Street into the government housing projects built for World War II arsenal workers. Delivery was always fun. We both enjoyed it, although I probably didn't help on freezing or rainy days, so it's possible that Rod didn't enjoy it every time. I often went with him on collection day just to lend support, and he really needed it. My brother Dick got a paper route too, much later, 1951. His paper was the Sacramento Bee, and his route the whole town. Somebody had to drive him. And since I got my first license in 1951, it was sometimes me. We had party line telephones during our first years in Benicia. I think that's all that was available. The family with whom we shared was the Bank of America manager and wife. My 3 younger brothers and I were their bane. Many, many times Mrs. Bank Manager would interrupt a call to say, "Would you please hang up? I have to make an important call." None of us was shy about letting her know our call was also important. Of course, this didn't happen when Mom was in the house, but she wasn't always within earshot. The summer of 1946, when I was between 6th and 7th grades, a girls' drill team was formed by the school band leader, Nicholas Bedoff, and led by a former WAC. We spent many Saturdays learning to march in formation, and for a couple years we entered parades all over the Bay Area and even beyond. For me, these were wonderful adventures. We usually traveled by bus, and once we arrived, our leaders would show us where we would assemble. Once the parade was over, we were able to roam until time to get back in the bus and go home, and roam we did. I think back on those days and wonder how any adults could stand to devote that much time to such a bunch of wild, prepubescent girls. We were pretty good, though. We wore white short-sleeved blouses and navy blue skirts, white saddle Oxfords, and each of us carried a baton with white rubber ball and tip, which we were very occasionally used in a simple routine. Only 4 designated majorettes ever got to twirl, and we did some serious marching, sometimes winning parade awards. I was 13 when the swimming pool was built downtown, and I was in the very first Red Cross swimming class there. And I suffered one of my life's worst humiliations there. I jumped into the pool when instructed and clung to the edge with my classmates, but I couldn't put my face in the water no matter how I tried. So the instructors moved me into a class which was held in the wading pool. I was the only student there taller than 24 inches. At 13, I was close to adult stature. And the instruction was learning to put your face in the water, open your eyes, and ultimately float on stomach and back. Those are still the things I do best. As an adult, I taught for several years in Red Cross backyard swim classes, and I always asked for beginners because I could so well relate to their fears and problems. That pool was the place to be for most of Benicia's teenagers, and I spent every summer day I could down there. 2 or 3 years after the failure of Dad's rabbit farm due to heat wave, the rabbit hutches, at least one of them, were put to good use. Early one day we found a large black and white speckled hen in the yard. Again, we kids were sent to the chicken farm nearby to see if they'd lost one. They said not that they'd noticed, so we adopted Henny Penny. A rabbit hutch became her home, and we had her for several years until she died peacefully of old age. I think she was happy with us. Once in a while she would crow at sunrise, and once in a while she'd give us an egg. She was often given the freedom of the yard, which was once almost her undoing. My mother's younger sisters were then living in San Francisco, and when the weather was nice, spent most weekends with us in Benicia. Aunt Marge's fiancé Bud came too. Bud was a San Franciscan born and raised, and to San Franciscans in those days, even more than now, Benicia was, if not exotic, at least country. And one day he ran excitedly into the garage to see Mom, shouting, "Look what we're having for dinner!" He was carrying Henny Penny, who he hadn't seen before, hanging upside down by her legs. The immediate uproar made it obvious he'd made a mistake. Dad took an overseas job for a couple years in 1948, and while he was gone, the aunts and Bud spent much time with us. Bud was a car buff. What he drove was a 36 Willys, and a huge treat for my brothers and me was always a wild ride with Bud in the Willys. We had an old Packard parked in the street. I don't remember how we got it, but it was a beauty with plush upholstery and jump seats between front and back, and even a glass sliding window over the back of the front seat. Bud tinkered with it until he got it running. Then we went on numerous Sunday evening trips. By ferry to Martinez, Snake Road from there to Crockett, across Carquinez Bridge to Vallejo, and home. The 8 of us the entire time listening to Mysteries and One Man's Family on the radio. I was never without activities geared toward my age group. At one point, for 18 months or so, I was a member of a church choir. Which church varied from time to time. We had a youngish woman leader named Roxy, who was our agent, and weeks or months after we started an engagement in one church, Congregational on West J Street, which is now Manuel Neri's home studio, and Presbyterian, I think, now a spa, and St. Paul's Episcopal, we'd suddenly be told we were to start at another. We, the kids in the group, never knew why, but we went where we were told and sang. While I was in high school, there was an everyday trek at lunchtime. Closed campus was a phrase not yet invented. Every student, or so I thought, left by the back gate and hiked the couple blocks to First Street. My favorite destination was the Chinese restaurant, where, for a quarter, we could get a bowl of rice drowned in what I still consider some of the best gravy ever. Another favorite place was the bakery next door to the State Theater, with booths and jukeboxes. Sometimes a friend and I would go to the grocery store, now Adobe Thrift Shop, and get sandwiches on my mother's account. For our free time, we had options besides the swimming pool. One exciting memory is of a teen center conducted on the second floor of the State Capitol building. I learned there how to play pool, not well, and ping pong. Music was by record player, including my favorite K-Star, and dancing was encouraged. I can remember teen dances held in the meeting room at St. Paul's, and for one lovely summer, there was a roller skating rink. My good friend Gail and I hung out there with everyone else, but try though we have, we cannot remember exactly where it was. We think maybe about where Cliff's Seaview Cafe is now. There were attractions for teenagers outside of Benicia as well. The Dream Bowl in Napa County, where the day's big names in music stopped on their road tours. I saw Tommy Dorsey, Harry James, and others. I wasn't hip enough to remember all the artists. In Vallejo, the Vets Hall frequently had jazz stars. And speaking of artists, once, when I was probably a sophomore, an acting troupe came to town to put on a show, Corns A-Poppin', at the high school. They recruited some high schoolers for minor parts, and my big chance in show business came when I was in one skit as an extra voice. The song was Doin' What Comes Naturally. About the same time, Benicia celebrated its centennial, what seemed to me to be almost a year-long celebration. There were dances and parades, of course, old-timers' ball games, beard-growing contests. For the duration, any adult male who didn't grow a beard was in grave danger of being arrested, thrown in the hoosegow in City Park, and held until he paid a stiff fine. And if he didn't learn better from that, he might be arrested again. Everyone, of course, was encouraged to dress as 1849.
As I said earlier, Mom had a hard time leaving Minnesota and then San Francisco, and it was years before she finally stopped missing the severe winters. But she lived in Benicia 44 years, and it became very much her home. She raised my two youngest brothers, Chuck and Pat, mostly alone. By the time they started school, Dad had finally achieved self-employment as a long-distance truck driver, hauling most of the time, home only for short stops. Mom worked from 1948 on, first at the Arsenal and then City Hall. She finally stood 3 times for election as city treasurer when Emily Pine decided to resign from that job, and held that position until she died. Her granddaughter Carrie served Benicia for 2 terms as an elected councilperson. I can remember during my teenage years feeling quite deprived, living in a small town, no place to go and nothing to do. But from the perspective of one who chose Benicia to raise her children, and whose grandchildren went through Benicia schools, none of whom ever shared my feelings of deprivation, it's obviously a very choice place for families.